This webinar is part of the ACBSP 2020 annual conference. I am Dr. David Kleva, Acting Dean of Business School Lausanne. My topic today is the Generalized Distance Learning Canvas, an innovative approach and a free tool to empower educators transitioning to distance learning solution. The Canvas came as a result of research and work I am currently leading with Dr. Dominique Bucchi. Dr. Dominique Bucchi is a serial entrepreneur. She's Swiss and German. She has founded and run companies in Switzerland and France. She has been an entrepreneur all her life. She was never on a payroll, actually. She founded her first company as she was 15. She's currently also director of the Doctoral School of Business School Lausanne. I have been in education for more than 30 years. I became director more than 20 years ago, and ever since I have tried to be an entrepreneurial executive. I am currently acting dean of Business School Lausanne. Together with Dr. Bucchi, we published a book titled Edupreneurial Pivot last year in France. You might not be familiar with the word edupreneurial. It's a word that designates a type of mindset that is adequate to transform schools. It is, in fact, the adaptation of the entrepreneurial mindset to education. Edupreneurial has to be understood as the equivalent for entrepreneurial for school. Together with Dr. Bucchi, we also created 21, the podcast on 21st century education, which you'll find on the website www.pivot.com. Generalized distance learning. It's a phenomenon that appeared in the spring of 2020 when governments all over the world decided to lock down the countries and ask all schools from primary to university to teach online or to move to distance learning. This is a very specific context where the education system had to move quickly and be very reactive to the condition, to the context. Dr. Bucchi and I consider that this COVID-19 crisis is the first real VUCA context that the education system has to face. It's fair to say that we have been living in a VUCA world for a few years, but the education system tends to live a bit apart from this world, apart from the rhythm, apart from the crisis, apart from the pacing of that very specific area of change, of accelerating change that we're living through. We thought that this encounter of the education system with the VUCA world would be a problem. In our book, we actually wrote the school fact, that's how we call the education system in the book. The school fact intentionally produces institutional cultures that are at odds with realities of the surrounding VUCA world. But at the time of the book, we only had weak signals of that phenomenon. However, we decided to name that the potential education cliff, meaning that the education system as a whole could come to a dead end where teaching would become literally impossible. That actually happened, or at least was a challenge, when COVID-19 broke out in various countries. As a solution to allow the education system to embrace the VUCA world, we thought the entrepreneurial mindset would be the biggest resource empowering teachers and school principals and institutions. So we created the word edupreneurial mindset, and we were suggesting that this would be the force to pivot the school. We used the term edupreneurial mindset to refer to the entrepreneurial mindset in the context of the school fact, considering that the school fact must use the resources of the entrepreneurial mindset to pivot. Hence the title of the book, Edupreneurial Pivot. We were happy to see in April 2020 that Andreas Schleicher, who is the head of the PISA test at the OECD and a major education thinker of today, also found the usefulness of the entrepreneurial mindset. In an interview he gave for the website 100, he said, I quote, In fact, if we don't see systems encouraging an entrepreneurial spirit in their teachers, many countries will be seen to fail miserably. That's the context of general distance learning. Our solution is what we call the generalized distance learning Canvas, and it's a tool that we have designed to empower all educators who transition to distance learning. It's a universal tool. It can be used at primary, secondary, or university level. It's a canvas. As business school professors or business school leaders, you are probably familiar with the idea of canvas in the framework of entrepreneurship. The business model canvas, which was invented a few meters away, literally from Business School Lausanne on the campus of University of Lausanne by Alexander Osterwalder and Yves Pigneur. The business model canvas is a very well-known tool in the startup world. One of the major findings of our book was that a top-down approach does not work when transforming the school. Top-down approaches are usually called education reforms, and most of them live long and have far less results than expected. As everything in this VUCA world, a successful transition to distance learning will only work if educators become actors of change. And this change of educators to real actors of change can be achieved, according to us, by connecting the educators to their entrepreneurial mindset. The GDL Canvas is there to help educators to structure and articulate their reflection to approach the 5 key questions of the transition to distance learning with an entrepreneurial mindset. To approach those questions with an entrepreneurial mindset, that's the idea. What are those questions? Well, there are 5 that we have identified. Or do you have a vision for the transition to GDL? Do you know what your institution expects from you? Do you know which resources you have at hand? How do you measure the value of your solution for your students? What alternatives do you have if something goes wrong? The answer to those questions cannot be straightforward. You have to build a solution that addresses all the questions at the same time or in the same solution, or at least that is capable of developing concrete answers to the question as time goes on. In order to get to that solution, we designed the GDL Canvas. So what is the Canvas useful for? First of all, it's a sparring partner that challenges the educator and helps identifying the problems to be solved. We developed activities in coaching of teachers and principals, and we developed schools with the entrepreneurial mindset. But it's not possible for us to coach everyone at the moment, obviously. So we thought that we could build a canvas as a substitute to the coaching and to really help the teacher establish a dialogue between his first intuitions, his reflection, and the concrete world, the context. And the canvas is there to have all the various parameters getting together at some point. The GDL Canvas is not a step-by-step process to generalize distance learning, simply because this transition to GDL cannot be considered a linear process. It's not something where you can give the same starting point to all professors, even in an institution, because they have different backgrounds, they have different knowledge, they have different discipline to touch, they have different easiness or savviness with technology. Therefore, each has to find its own path in the GDL transition. The GDL Canvas does not contain either a list of IT solutions. You can now find those lists easily on the web, and they are great. And the solutions that are available are just very efficient, fantastic, very innovative. And actually, in our journey at Business School Lausanne, we did not hesitate to work with startups to find solutions for the assessment, for instance. So the aim of the Canvas is not to give a list, but the aim of the Canvas is to help the educators navigate those lists that are usually long and very rich and very varied, and where a lot of time can be lost if one doesn't have a real driver through the list. The Canvas starts with the question of the vision. Vision is necessary to make sure the educator takes ownership of the problem-solving process. This is a common sense remark for those who know entrepreneurship, where all the specialists or the experts emphasize the importance of vision. But it might be not so obvious for educators because they are sort of thrown into the situation of the COVID-19 crisis and might be tempted to adopt a passive attitude, waiting for their leadership to bring them a solution. However, we think it's not the way where educators can be the most effective. We have to really invite them to think about their vision of the situation. And even if the transition to GDL does not depend on their choice, they have to become actor of the process. That's their interest, to become actor of the process. And to become actors on the process, they must rely on a vision. But we remind in the Canvas that vision cannot always be expressed in words at the beginning. Vision is built on the go. So an intuition, a first driver, a first pre-vision is just as useful as a clear statement at the beginning. The GDL Canvas is actually here to help construct this vision, to help construct the vision on the go, and finally find the right wording for it, which is actually a very secondary question. The first step of the GDL Canvas is the clarification step, or the entrepreneurial clarification, as we call it with Dr. Burki, in order to differentiate this process from other psychological approach or coaching approach that also use the notion of clarification. This is actually one of the originality of the entrepreneurial pivot approach, to set clarification and entrepreneurial clarification as the first step towards a success of an entrepreneurship project. This is very important. We don't rush to the tools. We don't rush to the ideas. We focus first on the clarification that the entrepreneur must lead for himself. And this clarification must happen at three levels: at the personal level, at the context level, and at the resources level. At the personal level, the clarification is there to acknowledge the fact that generalized distance learning disrupts the educator's job description. A lot of things that were true before, a lot of things that were imperative before, all of a sudden fade away. And it becomes more difficult for the educator to see exactly what is expected from him. In other words, the educator has choices to make, and he has to know where he wants to stand in those choices. Is he going to see a real opportunity in the situation? Is he going to be energized by the situation, or is the situation going to be a burden for him? Those questions must be asked clearly and must be answered consciously by the educator. Otherwise, they become a kind of a gray zone that holds the educator back and doesn't allow him or her to really become the actor of the change. To give a concrete example, there's one professor at BSL who actually used to travel to BSL to teach from a foreign country, and could have actually decided to stay in his home country, which is Slovenia, and teach from there because online learning allows that. He actually decided to stay in Switzerland because he felt more comfortable in using the classroom of the schools to have optimal condition for his teaching. So when the lockdown was decided in Switzerland, instead of commuting from Slovenia to Switzerland, he actually stayed in Switzerland and used Business School Lausanne as his basis for his teaching. This was not a request by the school, by all means, but it was really a proof that he has this vision that the classroom could be useful to give him the tools, to give him the atmosphere, to give him the kind of environment that would benefit his teaching. So that's how his personal vision led him to choices that are demanding choices and also made for the success of the approach. Clarification is also necessary on the context level. It's very important we find that institutions set the expectations they have to the educators in the context of GL very clearly. The context is, of course, difficult to grasp completely. There are many questions. In Switzerland, obviously, the first question is, well, when shall we be back to the classrooms? But there are other questions that the institution has to make clear so that the educator can make more informed choices. So the Canvas invites the educator also to ask this question, to identify the person to talk to get those questions answered at the context level. At Business School Lausanne, for instance, we made it very clear from the beginning that the choice we made of the type of distance learning was what we have decided to call online face-to-face, insisting on the fact that we would keep the same timetables, that we would keep the same time for meetings between the professors and the students. We would really build on that existing organization of time in order to optimize the effort. This doesn't mean that we did only online face-to-face or we did only video conferencing as teaching. Absolutely not. We use platform, we share exercises, we build interactivity with the students, but we decided to make it clear to the faculty that we wanted everything to start with an online face-to-face at a given time in order to pace the effort of teaching and to pace the learning of the students. This proved to be a success because it gave to the faculty a strong hint of what we expected. We also made clear from the beginning that the emphasis had to be first on teaching and learning, and that we would discuss assessment once we had some experience of the teaching, and that was quite easy to do actually. Once the professor were on cruise speed for teaching and learning, it was quite easy for them to design the kind of assessment they wanted to do with the students. So we were really, really keen on, really focused on bringing, on expressing our expectations to the professors very, very clearly. The resource level is also a level for clarification. What happened is that once the vision, the personal clarification, and the context have been led, the teacher is ready, the professor is ready to look at the resources and make choices in the resources at hand. One important thing to remind here is that the key attribute of the entrepreneurial mindset is the capacity to do with the resources at hand. Entrepreneurs do not wait until they get the best software to start working. They don't wait until they get the best office or the best computer. They are capable of developing their vision, of making their idea a reality with the resources they find at hand. This is very important to cherish this capacity because, of course, in the educational system, the temptation for the educators is to wait for the leadership to come with pre-chosen resources. And we know, or probably we all have experienced, the difficulty it is sometimes to come with a great resource that is not very welcome by the professors. But this is not the way to go. And this actually proves quite useless in regular time. So you can easily imagine that in a time of crisis, that kind of approaches is not going to work. On the other hand, if you really ask the professor to look at the resources they have at hand, what they can do with the things they know how to do, they know how to use, well, then they find solutions. So at BSL, we really focus on having a hotline, an IT hotline, here to help the professor maximize the use of the technological solution they were already using. We were actually already using Google Classroom as a way to push our content to the students, and it was quite obvious that we should use that platform. Business School Lausanne is part of an educational group, and we actually have other online solutions, an online distance learning solution, but we thought they were not adequate. It was more relevant to stick with what we had already, with what already working, and we asked the professor to use Google Classroom, but we supported them in adapting that to the transition to GDL. So the three levels of clarification are the first line of the Canvas, so to say. That's where the Canvas asks questions to the professor, quite specific questions. So the professor can start really developing his vision and have a kind of a pre-analysis of the situation. Then it's time to move from project, from clarification to execution. What we have tried to do in the Entrepreneurial Pivot GDL Canvas is to translate entrepreneurial methods into an ideation process adapted for educators. We did not try to replicate the value proposition canvas, for instance, or even the business model canvas, or just adapt it, but we were really in depth into the thinking around those canvas to transform it, to make it something that will be useful for educators. So the steps from project to educations are also 3 steps. First is the identification of the problems to be solved. This is has something to do vaguely with the value proposition. And then the look at the lean management of resources. Again, we go back to the principle we had before that entrepreneurs know to do with the resources at hand. What happens is that when you start to execute and when you start to make your solution a reality, they become visible. And there comes the third step of the Canva, which is the sharing of best practices. This is also something that will empower the teams very quickly to move to GDL, to generalize distance learning. Problem solving. Well, it is very important to remind professors that problems must be solved at 2 levels. They have to be solved at the level of the GDL deployment itself. This is absolutely key. The distance learning classroom is a co-construction between the professor and the students. And therefore, it's a learning opportunity for the students. And unlike what happens in classroom teaching, the construction of the classroom can be made visible. And we can really invite the students to be partner in this building. And this way, they will start to actually develop some very key 21st century skills, such as communication skills, collaboration skills, the thing that we were invited to develop before in a context that was in fact completely school decided and professor led, and where we had to make conscious efforts to put students in situation to actually work and develop their 21st century skills in the traditional classrooms. We have moved to a different context where actually the opportunities to prove to be collaborative, to prove to be critical thinkers, to prove to be communicators, to prove to be computer skilled. All those contexts are much more common in the general distance learning, and they are great contexts for students to learn. And that's something where the 21st century skill can really flourish. Then, of course, the second level of problem solving is the learning itself, the actual activities that the educators have to prepare for the students. We were very lucky at Business School Lausanne that we had given up a long time ago the long lectures by professors to replace them by active learning, either through projects that we bring in the classroom, concrete project, real project, by case studies, sometimes by approaches that also rely on gamification. And all those activities had to be translated to the online face-to-face. They actually translate better than the lecture, even if the lecture is easier to do at the beginning. Since we have blocks of 4 hours, of course, there was no question that lecture couldn't come back to BSL. That would have meant so many hours of just passive listening for the students that would not have been effective. But all of the other models, gamification, flipped classroom, concrete project, everything is quite easy to translate into technology, because IT platforms, cloud platforms, collaborative environment are the actual tools through which this happens really in business. So it's as if we had the opportunity to bring the students in real business environment. That was a big push to the learning, to the teaching and learning. Of course, when you do problem solving with an entrepreneurial mindset, You want to have the feedback of the students. You want to know what works and what doesn't work. And you want to be able to fail fast, to let the solution that don't work aside quickly, even though you thought it would be great. There were many questions among the professors. For instance, is it good to have, is it useful to have two screens when you teach? So you can see you can see what your students see, and they realize as they became more comfortable with the IT platforms that it was actually quite easy to follow on a single platform. You know, all those things, all those feedback, all those sharing is key to make sure that the problem solved, the problem solved is the real problem. Second step, the lean management of the resources. I'm sure we have recognized the word lean and the idea of lean startup, but we try to stay in that process. Here again, it's very important because if you ask people to focus on their context, to focus on what's going on really, they become more active. If you give them perspective, they will wait for you to lead them to the perspective, and they become more passive, you know, expecting something for you rather than seeing what they can do. So lean management of the resources, we emphasize the fact in the GDL Canvas that GDL is a work in progress and that you have to first focus on the fastest solution. That will be the best solution, not the one that is necessarily recommended by the pedagogical theories or not the one that has proven successful in the past. The first solution you want to focus on is the one that can be set up the most quickly. This is why we ask the professors to focus first on communication, because, you know, establishing email contacts, video conference contacts, WhatsApp contacts, this is really what can happen fast and what has to happen first. And then they could build on that for other activities. Also, we ask them to focus on activities that were the easiest and the fastest to set up, probably group work, collaborative problem solving were the things where it was most obvious to move first, and that gives the habit to the students to work together, to exchange, to develop, and by then, by the feedback, the students and the professor being partner, they build a community, and based on that community, the whole learning process is transformed. Remember also that trial and error is the best way to find solution. We come back to the fail fast principle that you don't want to try again and again the same solution. If it proves inefficient, you have to be quick on changing. This is very important. This is also different from education. You know, the old cycle of the educational reforms where you had a pedagogical theory, then a pilot, then the generalization of the pedagogical reform. All those things are too slow for the situation, but the trial and error, oh, I've tried to teach this way, I thought it was a good thing, but it doesn't work. Why? What can I learn from that? All this is there to have the long-term success. If I take the example of BSL, we actually started with online face-to-face because I knew that we wouldn't be able to have a proper distance learning platform. Distance learning platforms are very sophisticated learning environments, and you cannot roll them out overnight. It takes thinking, it takes experience to improve them, but we could move quickly to that online face-to-face. So that was, if you want, a kind of a minimalistic solution at the beginning. However, it proved very efficient. We got excellent feedback from the students, and the community built by the students and the professor is actually a leading and learning community that you know is animated by a growth mindset. And therefore, we have decided to move to what we know called the dual mode learning. We are lucky enough in Switzerland to have seen the end of the lockdown a few weeks ago. It's now June 2020, and we started to let the lockdown fade away, or to leave the lockdown by beginning of May in Switzerland. So we are about 5 weeks into the end of the lockdown. So we are lucky enough to be able to welcome students back to the classroom. However, some of our students actually moved back to their countries when the lockdown was decided, when the virus broke out, and they cannot come back to Switzerland right now. So we have to find a way to mix students who are in the classroom and students who are actually far away from us. So our hybrid solution is what we call dual mode learning. What we try to do is to teach in the classroom in a way in which it's possible for the students to follow online. So it's still pretty much based on the online face-to-face, except we have students who are in the classroom. We have just started that, but we see the progress as fast. The first problems we had with a professor, for instance, wanted to use the whiteboard again, but he quickly realized it was completely useless. So we see those things evolving quite quickly, and the progress are fast, and the feedback, although we just started, are already quite promising. A few last words on the best practices. What we have learned from the situation. Number one is focus on communication channels and really apply the whatever works principle. What is important is that students and professors know how they can communicate to each other. It can be emails, it can be video conferences, it can be text messages, it can be any kind of solution. And it's important to respect the choice of the students and meet them in what they prefer. Doesn't make sense to decide that this, solution that is more in favor for the school, for instance, to prefer email because it's the school think it's better, doesn't mean anything. We have to go with the flow. We have to reach the students by any communication channel that we find useful. And of course, as soon as the communication channel is established, things can grow very quickly. Invest time on solutions that can last beyond general distance learning Canvas. That was one of the reasons for us to choose Google Classroom, because we know that was useful before, and that if we intensify the use of that precise device, of course, when we go back to Classroom, we can build on that, and the benefits we have can be shared. And for instance, we are developing some extension to our learning management system. And the developer, who happens to be also one of our professors, immediately saw the importance of connecting Google Classroom to the LMS and actually change a part of his development. Remember that online face-to-face are not limited to video lectures. We choose the name online face-to-face as a metonymy. It's only a part of the whole thing, but it's the part that is the most identifying. This is why we chose it. However, it doesn't mean that the distance learning has to be limited to online face-to-face. There are many other ways that you can work with the students. I'm named them already: collaborative work, flipped classroom, and other things that I know. Remember always that the transition to generalized distance learning Canvas is a great learning opportunity for the students. This is absolutely key, and I think that's where probably the entrepreneurial mindset and the edupreneur mindset actually will be the most effective, because it will spread from the professor to the students. One of the things we show in our book is that there's a strong convergence between the 21st century skills and the entrepreneurial mindset. Therefore, it is all the better to actually have the entrepreneurial mindset of the professor sort of cascading on the mindset of the students. This will make a huge change in education, because it will be the end of the passivity of the students. It will be an acceleration of the activity of the active learning for the students. Last but not least, remember that they are ready-made solutions and they can be very helpful. What I mean by that is that, for instance, if you decide to use a new software, you can be sure to find on YouTube very good tutorials that you don't have to do one and again, and that will help you share the solution, develop the solution with your students. There are also all sorts of ready-made content. They are not there to replace the original content that you are going to give to your students, but they can really help to document bits and parts of what you're saying by things that are already on the web and they can already be used. Again, ready-made solutions are there as support to your teaching, not to replace your teaching. But think about them, especially every time you have something concrete to show to the students, you can be sure to have a video, especially on YouTube, which is very rich for that. to share with the students. That's it for the presentation of the General Distance Learning Canvas. I wanted to finish with the cover of our book. You can read that the subtitle is still in French, which means we haven't yet the English version, but we are actually finishing the translation and proofreading it right when I'm speaking to you right now. And we'll make sure to make this book available in English. By all means, the website www.pivot.com is very rich, and you will find interviews, you will find concrete tools, and you will find the GDL Canvas on free download there. And we will be happy to answer all your questions if you have any. I thank you for your attention. I really hope that this presentation of the GDL Canvas will be helpful in your everyday practice. I hope it will help you accelerate your transition to general distance learning. And I really hope that this is only a start, and that even though the circumstances are dramatic, this time of history, we can say, will be a time of renaissance also for the education system. I want also to thank you, ACBSP, for having given me the opportunity to share that material with you. And on behalf of Dr. Dominique Bourki and I really wish you to stay safe, to stay healthy. Thank you.